thanks, of course, to Ian, who was going to give us our presentation today. A quick moment of housekeeping, just to let you all know. I'll repeat this again at the end because I know some people have to drop early sometimes. We will be publishing our next event, if not today, in the next couple of days, which will be in person at the Tower, August 11th. We'll be doing the Headless 360 kind of kickoff tour, or at least in this area. I know we've had at least one group also do this session. So if you missed that one, you'll be able to hopefully make this one. And we'll talk about Headless 360, and we'll see how different it is between now and then. But it's a hands-on workshop. You'll bring your computer. And so keep an eye out for that. With that, I'll introduce our co-leader and extraordinary speaker, I want to call him Sir Ian Gotts all the time. So I'm going to knight you. And welcome. Thanks for being here. Thanks for chatting with us. And I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Make this as interactive as you want. I'm very happy to answer questions, pick up points. If we digress, that's fine. I think that's part of being the community, rather than the last thing you want is me just going through some slides and shouting at you. But what I want to talk about is context, and the fact that agents are brilliant goldfish, that every time you start a new conversation, it seems like you have to try and remind it where it is, what it's doing. And all the time that's taken and the tokens that are burnt up doing that. And that's all about context. And that's really the conversation I want to have. And really dig into what do we mean by context? It's one word, but actually there's quite a lot implied. So I've written quite a lot around context. If you go to iangotts.com #writing, or just go to iangotts.com, and then there's a menu at the top, writing. I've been writing lots of different articles about context from different perspectives. The presentation I'm giving, I go into quite a lot of detail in one of the sessions, one of the blogs. So a great quote here, which is, when they do something dumb, don't blame them. Instead, ask yourself what context you failed to set. Right? I think that's really right. Rather than us going, oh, the agent didn't work, or that didn't work. Yeah, what didn't we talk to? What didn't we give it? The interesting thing, that quote is actually from a book called Rules, No Rules, from Netflix. The reason they wrote a book about it was the Netflix organization was so unusual in terms of the way it worked and so effective, they wrote a book about it. And that's where this quote comes from. And clearly that quote looked like it came about agents, but that quote was about people, because the book was written in 2020. And I'll just read out sort of the three concepts that really backed up Netflix. By the way, it's a great book. The first is build up talent density by creating a workforce of high performers. The second is increase talent density by paying the top of the market and increase candor, which means if they haven't got it, give them really good feedback and make sure that they take that feedback on board. And top performers always do that. And the third was actually eliminate any controls you don't need. Now, all of that sounds like the perfect environment for an agent. Yes, make sure you've got the most talented thing, which is obviously the best models with the best skills deployed in the best way. Increase candor by giving them as much feedback as possible, and the third is reduce the rules. So this was an organization that clearly is very effective, Netflix. The point about bringing the book up is that we are now moving to a world where every one of our organizations is going to be like this, because we're all going to have agents in the workforce. So we need to take a leaf out of Netflix's book and think about how our organizations change, and then how we actually manage those agents. And as it said in the quote there, think about what context you failed to set. I mean, they used the word before it was even a big thing. So what I want to talk about is the different types of context. And again, if this was a live workshop, or I'd probably force you all to talk about where these things come from, but I won't do that. I'll talk about them as principles. So the first is obviously transactional data. So it's the data in your account object, in your opportunity object. It's the data in that custom object. But the downside we've got obviously with an agent is we can't just give it our entire org and all of that data. So how do we work out what transactional data we need? Well, obviously you can see the slides. we need to look at the metadata. We need to look at which of those objects are the ones that hold the data which is relevant. And when I say the metadata, I mean, well, I've got 3 opportunity objects. So which one do I really need to look at? If I'm thinking about partners, are partners part of the account, or do they have their own separate objects? So that metadata definition starts to narrow down the data that we need to give to the agent. So we're all about minimizing the amount of data, the context that we give to the agent, to make sure that obviously it performs as well as possible. Because we all know that the more data or context you give an agent, the worse it performs. You've heard of the concept of context rot, where the agent starts to get worse and worse the more context you give it. So if you go, right, okay, so transactional data, we know which objects which we need to aim at because of the metadata. Well, how do we know which metadata we should be aimed at? What? Okay, so how do we know which metadata to aim at? Then obviously,
Is it not staying alive here?
no. Why does it stop?
I'll try removing the moderator move. See if that helps.
There we go. Thank you. Perfect. So how do we know which metadata we need to be aiming at? Well, we need to think about the overall business operation. So if it's partner renewal, that may be a very different set of metadata than, say, onboarding a new partner. Maybe it's the same metadata, I don't know. But unless you understand that business operation in detail, we're unlikely to be able to work out which metadata we should be aimed at, and therefore which data we should be aimed at. And then the last point about context is actually organization and culture. And I think this is probably the one that most people never think about. But your agent is goal seeking on, you gave it an outcome, it will cheat, it will use no rules to make sure it can get to whatever that outcome is. But you want to give it your organization and culture's rules. And those obviously think about how you gained those when you joined the company. That was your onboarding. That was sitting with teams, watching your manager, your boss work out how they work through decisions. It's the company culture. It's the values, as in the values that really operate, not the values that are on your website if they're different. So that organization and culture determines whether your agent says, well, the rules are I can't give you a discount, so I won't, versus actually you're a really important customer and maybe we won't give you a discount, but I'll pass you to someone more senior to look at. And I think the biggest failing is we're not thinking about all these different types of contexts that we're giving an agent. So we think about the top 2, they're very unstructured. The bottom 2 are very structured, which makes it quite difficult to give to an agent. The structured data is easy. The unstructured, which is, I know we're going to get a JSON file, we're going to give it of a business process, so we're going to give it a process diagram, a screenshot. And then as we get to the top, organization and culture, like really hard to like we probably haven't even captured that anywhere. I'm not sure how many people have ever read their company operations manual. I remember when I first joined Accenture back in 1986, there were only 100 people in the company, and they sat down and they gave us a physical, here's the operation, your manual, you need to read that and sign it. So we were all like, well, we ought to do that. So we all read it and signed it. And one of the things in the manual was you couldn't fly your own plane to a client. And we were sitting in London going, that's ridiculous. Why would you ever fly a plane to a client? But hey, maybe you were an Accenture partner living in the middle of Texas and actually flying the plane to the client was the right answer. But again, was that relevant to us? No, it wasn't. I probably wouldn't have remembered that apart from the fact it was so unusual until I was a partner in Texas and about to fly my plane. But then the other question is, what was that rule for? Was that because you didn't want to flex to the client that I've got my own plane, or was it a risk issue, or was it an insurance issue? So what was the intent behind that? So quite often when we think about organization and culture, it's like there are some rules out there, but what's the intent? And again, with Netflix, they tried to reduce all the rules which really weren't critical and weren't necessary. So you could strip away all the noise so you could understand actually how did you really operate. I'll pause there for a moment because I've talked about a lot. I've sort of uncovered the context. Any questions or thoughts that people want to raise, or we can pick up now?
I just feel it's when we talk about context, like the struggle I have is how much is too much and how to balance to give the amount that the agents really need to behave the way we wish and not to exceed the context window or to exceed number of tokens or add extra cost that is not needed.
Well, again, the Netflix thing was like no rules, only apply the rules that are necessary. I think with context, it's quite interesting. If you drew a sort of a funnel for every transaction, every agent, you probably need as much of the organization and culture as possible. You need the relevant business operations, then as little metadata and as little transactional data as possible. But if you think about human, you give them a job to do, they go and they do it in a really weird way, and you go, okay, what did I not give you? What have I not given you? So I think it's that constant feedback of going, okay, why is the agent not behaving like we expected? And then go back and say, okay, what did we not give you? Maybe it might be a skill, it might be the skills, but it might also be, is the context not there? And I think we all give agents far too little context. And that's why we have problems. I don't know of anybody who's giving an agent anything to do with organization and culture. Very few people I've seen giving any genuine business operations. Agent script is about the closest you're seeing to any business operation.
So one of my topics that we shared was last week at Texas Stream was BA. The session was called BA Rage in the AI Age. And one of the things I talked about was building out an ontology map. And it sounds fancy, but I'm with Sally. I'm like, well, like at what level is appropriate? Because you don't map the world. That's just way too intense, and you'll never get anything done. Because once you commit anything to pen to paper, it's already stale. But it would be interesting to kind of understand some of the readiness that you see out there in your research and stuff like that can give practical tips to doing things like ontology mapping, better context diagram, right? We talked about like how the business context diagram is not what you're used to of yesteryear from 5 years ago. It's a system of systems that you have to draft out now. And there was a graphic. I'll share the link to the graphic and I'm trying to remember what the company was called. It was in my deck, and it's funny because I have to recall it. Atlan. And it was pretty interesting.
ATLAN, Atlan. Yes.
Yeah. And it was like context mining. So a system of records, systems of data, systems of knowledge, systems of work, runtime signals, having your core foundations of knowledge graphing, semantics, ontology, skills. And it was just like, oh my gosh, it's very overwhelming for us as humans to just successfully set up these things. So it would be cool to have someone like, okay, the truth is somewhere in the middle. So yes, understanding that the context is incredibly important, but what is good enough?
So you used a word called ontology, which sounds like very clever, but actually that's being used more and more, or I say a graph database. So did you give a definition of ontology, or do you want to try and give one for the group?
So what I use as the definition in the context that we used is a map of business entities, concepts, and their interrelationships. And it's not. It looks very familiar because it kind of looks like an ERD, but it in fact is not an ERD because it talks about how things relate to each other, including business rules and how you ground it, and then where do you define those business rules, etc.
Yeah. So let me, if I may, let me expand on that. So if you think about a graph database rather than a relational database, you end up with nodes and edges. So a node would be the different things that you're storing. So it could be an object, it could be a resource, it could be an activity, it could be a pain point, it could be an automation. And then the edges are how they connected. So a resource is called by a flow to deliver an activity. And therefore you end up with this spider's web of things. But the beauty of having, when you build the ontology, the first thing you're doing is you're defining what you think all those nodes are and what all those edges are. So if you were just thinking about organization and culture, you'd end up with maybe 10 nodes and 20 edges. But actually, if you're trying to build it for everything on the diagram there, it might be 80 or 100 nodes and 200 different edges. But then what happens is, as you're storing the data, it gets stored as nodes and edges, which means that then you can then access it, not as just lists through the database, but actually it can navigate through that ontology or through that graph database. And that's a way of storing some of this, so it's way more efficient. So if you've ever heard of something called the brain or second brain or open brain, maybe you know in there, the idea that you can store all your thoughts in essentially a graph database, but then use them to draw it back and pull all your thoughts back in a particular way. Well, I took that and about a month or two ago, probably 2 months ago, built something called Aquabrain, which is an open brain. Everything I do, whenever I'm in Claude, I hit say save to Aquabrain against a particular lens or theme, and it just stores it. And then whenever I want to go and do something, I go and get all my thoughts from Aquabrain that are relevant to this. And it will pull them back, not necessarily from a theme, but it will pull them back from different places. So the ability for me to write articles is now 10x faster, because it's now recalling all of the thoughts from the brain and going, okay, and hang on, there was another thing here which doesn't feel related, but actually is a really good acronym. Why don't you think about that? So that's, and the power of that is not because I've basically dumped everything I've ever thought of in a big database or as a big folder of things, but it's been stored as a graph database, which you can then access. So that's this idea of an ontology taken to a very narrow view, because it's just for me. But if you think about it from an organizational brain, that's what Palantir is talking about when they build an ontology. Clearly very sophisticated, far more than I've just described. But essentially they are there categorizing how the organization works, how the business operation works, how the systems are configured. So does that kind of make that, I guess that starts to
yeah,
what you
it's giving me a feel of a man with two brains, Steve Barton-ish. But yeah, no, it helps. But I feel like that topic in itself deserves its own session.
Yeah,
like just to pick your brain literally about that part. But thank you. I didn't want to derail this meeting too long, but I just when you were talking about context and stuff like that, that was one of the things that we were driving home, was like, context is extremely important. It's extremely nuanced. But how do you not drown yourself in this activity?
So if you store, thinking about storing the business operations and the organization and culture as this idea of a graph database or an ontology, because it genuinely is unstructured, versus the metadata, which clearly in Salesforce it sits in, you can get access to it through the metadata API, and then the data clearly sits in databases somewhere.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, Ian, just in the interest of time, I know, I don't know how much more content you've got, and I know there's also more questions, but perhaps if you were to continue down your path, you might answer some of those questions, and then we can go actually answer questions too. I just want to make sure we have enough time in the hour.
Okay. Right. So that's the context. I think, as I said, the further down the stack, the more available it is. The further up the stack, the more important it is. So actually what's important isn't very available. What's really available actually is less important in relative terms. So I'm really worried about Dad. That's an interesting statement. I did a lot of improv comedy type training a while back to try and improve my presentation skills. And when you walk on stage, they go, two people walk on stage. The first thing is you've got to set context really quickly. You walk on and go, hi, I'm Ian. And someone else goes, hi, I'm Janine. The answer is, great, I've got nothing. What are you thinking about? What's the scene? You've given me nothing. I've no idea what's happening. But someone who's good, you walk on stage and go, thank you for meeting for a coffee, Janine. I'm really worried about Dad. You've immediately established something. We know that we're probably in a coffee shop. We know what the topic is, and we probably are either very good friends or we're siblings. That idea of context can be set really quickly. But again, back to, I think, Sally's question, you've got to be really tight about the way you phrase it, and unambiguous. So thinking about, there are 4 questions to ask about every one of those 4 types of context, and I'll go through these relatively quickly. The first is, and think about it as you can go top to bottom, culture, operations, metadata or data, or bottom up, it doesn't really matter. The first is, does it exist and who owns it? Now, as you said, the ones at the top, like, does it exist is quite a hard question. Like, what is our organization? What is our culture? Where are the values? Who owns them? If we think about business operations, that might be owned across multiple business units. So there's a whole challenge about, okay, working out, like, who does this stuff even exist that we need, and do we is it, who owns it? Then we got to ask the question, is it valid, and is it even valuable? So the first one is it valid? Do we even know this is correct? Piece of work I've been doing at the moment with Salesforce internally is going, this is great, this bit of content, but who do I even ask to say whether it's correct? And I'm like, oh, I've no idea. Is there a name on the bottom? No, there isn't. Okay, how do I even find out whether this bit of content is worth putting into our context database because it's actually accurate and valid? And if it's not valid, who do I go and talk to? And therefore, if it's valid, how do I check with them to work out whether it's still valuable in the context of what we're trying to do? The next is it written and tagged for AI? I don't know, any of you have read the 822-page release note? Most of you probably threw it into ChatGPT, but I'm not sure that release note is written for AI. How many times did they write end of life, or did they put some nuance of, they didn't really want to say you can't use the feature anymore, so they called it, they used some other phrase which AI wouldn't understand. So again, any content that we're putting in there in terms of context, is it written, and then how are we going to make it easy for AI to read? The obvious one is you tag it in a database, you stick it in an ontology. But first of all, is it written correctly? And again, that's a big challenge, I think, when we're looking at as you go up the stack, the business operations, the culture, but even some of the metadata. Some of the metadata is hard to get to, even through the metadata API, and understand whether it's correct or not. And then the last one is, can an agent even access this? And if it does, what are the security implications? So if an agent can access it, and it then can expose it to other people, is that still valid? So again, there are some 4 very simple sounding questions, but when you start digging into them, start to get quite complicated and detailed as you look at the sort of 4x4 matrix. And Salesforce talks about the context layer, which is this trusted context and activate context, but actually it's only the bottom 2 layers in any of their diagrams. They've completely ignored anything about business operations. They've completely ignored anything to do with organization and culture. So the agents are fighting with their arms tied behind their back. Is it any wonder the agent actually doesn't behave like a human agent, because it doesn't have half the things that all of us had when we first joined an organization? Okay, so the other fun game to play is, if this was a live session, I'd like every one of you to say, I want to see you at the all hands, but have it mean something different. And you go, that's kind of weird. What do you mean? But I want to see you after the all hands, or I want to see you after the all hands. There are so many different ways you could say that. And again, you can go around the room. It's a great fun exercise for presentation training. But I want to see you at the all hands. Use those same words and make it mean something different. And you can keep on going around the room. And interestingly, the more you go around the room, the more people you get to, the more theatrical they have to be. The more they have to think about which words, where to put the emphasis, or like pointing or standing up or whatever that is, it becomes more theatrical. And again, Ian, why on earth are you talking about this? If you think about communication, only 7% is words. 38%. 38%. 38% is tonality. And 55% everything else. Where you stand, how you look, the actions you take, the expression on your face. And the issue again for this is that agents only get 7% of the words. So we have to be far more accurate in terms of what we're giving it, because an agent's taking in words from an input, it's using words as context. So we've got a far harder job than we had. Thank you very much. We had a far harder job than we had. If Bevy doesn't like my slides, just tell me. Don't just keep stopping me.
Yeah. Does it just keep stopping the presentation? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, just stop sharing.
Okay.
Like that.
At the risk of, I don't want to derail things too much, but at the risk of asking what may be something you're in the process of answering, a couple slides back, you sort of said Salesforce provides, for number 3 and number 4, but not for numbers 1 and number 2. And do you think it's because the expectation is that's part of what we're supposed to provide in our initial prompt or in our initial, as we're doing our setup of an agent, or is the expectation like that's on us, that's on the developer or the writer, to provide that context, right? Because like this information, transactional data, metadata, configuration can be got from, look over here at the system, but the context that needs to be contemplated or kept in mind while executing on whatever we're trying to get it to do should be provided by the, like, kind of to your point, the person asking the question, because depending on how I ask the question, I could get a very different result.
I don't think it's on the person asking the question. That's part of it, but actually a lot of that, I mean, the business process, the culture, that's on what the agent needs to understand. I don't think Salesforce thinks about it because they haven't thought about it. I mean, they're worrying about getting their agents to work. They haven't thought in the terms of what does it really take, and also it's not in their system. There's nowhere they can't. There's no app that they have to put it in, so therefore they're not going to talk about it. But
isn't that on me as the person who's creating an agent to provide my agent that context?
Yeah, I think that's true. But if Salesforce goes, this is all you need to make an agent work, then they're selling you short, which is why we're doing these presentations. Wow. I think what's interesting is you think about the last 20 years of the ecosystem. We've all, as trailblazers, filled in the gaps that Salesforce has left. Agentforce, agents, Data 360 is moving so fast, no one is filling in those gaps the same way as we did around CRM because things are moving so quickly. So it's these sorts of presentations. It's things like the things that Sally's doing in terms of Sally codes. It's things like Anne's presentation. We're now filling in those gaps. I don't think Salesforce is thinking very hard about this because it's spending time trying to make the applications work. And it's something they are ignoring, but it's critically important. To give you an example, about 2 years, when Agentforce first came out, if you remember, I banged on about the importance of documenting a business process to actually capture and make an agent work. How long did it take them to pick that up? They went, oh, we've created this brand new thing that no one's ever heard of. It's called Agent Script. Give me a break.
I was like, wait, have they picked that up yet?
Agent Script's just been picked up. But the Salesforce professional services team have been using a process-driven approach, which is essentially Agent Script, okay, for the last year and a half. And oddly enough, they came back to us and went, you couldn't take an Agent Script and reverse engineer it into a business process, could you? Like, seriously? Yes, of course we could. But kind of that's a bit arse about face.
But that's not the way we should be doing things.
Absolutely not. But I think there's quite a lot of, we are Salesforce and we've got all this research and we understand how agents work. So I think there's a little bit of ivory tower maybe is what's coming out. And it's always been the case. And the Trailblazer group has always been the group who've been going, no, this is what it takes to implement it in the field and why that's so valuable. The problem is I think things are moving on so quickly that the moment, why would you do a presentation about Agent Script when Dreamforce Agent Vibes is going to come out or something new is going to come out? It feels like we're constantly chasing. Whilst the CRM, it was stable for multiple years, and therefore people could spend the time and energy to prove stuff worked around a particular product. I think it's just the nature of where we are, I think, in terms of how fast things are moving.
I think there's a couple of things for that is because number one, I can't see Parker Harris being able to eloquently state that at a keynote stage, right? To talk about that nuance and talking about the operational things. The other part of it is obviously the state of which an organization is in for agentic readiness is a massive mirror. And you can't exactly say, hey, your house is a hot mess, in order to proceed. So I think that that's the reason why we're able to do that, to deliver those tough messagings. And then with regards to this graphic that you're displaying now, would we not be able to provide said 1 and 2 context in the Data 360 federated portions of attaching it to, our policies and procedures? So, more aspects of the, tying it to the process flows, the business operations, the exceptions, all those different things. Now, I don't know how well it reads those unstructured components. And then I actually haven't had any hands-on experience, but I would love to with, what is it, Regrello? Is that how you pronounce that?
Yeah.
And how that could give that layer 1, layer 2 that you were talking about from a contextual perspective. So I don't know if it's strictly just 3 and 4. If you assume and if you attach those things as unstructured inputs to further ground and build those contexts for your agents. Am I wrong in that? Is that too simplistic, or am I drinking too much of the Kool-Aid and I'm getting blinded by?
I don't. Okay, so a couple of points. One is Regrello is not that. Regrello is understand how systems work so it can actually build agents and build flows. So it's not trying to build the 2 top layers. Those 2 top layers, yeah, absolutely. You could build something in, I guess, in Data 360. I think there are better databases designed for that than Data 360, whether it's a Neo4j or even just a simple Postgres database. I think there will be products coming out. You mentioned one, Atlan. I think you mentioned at the beginning. There are products out there that are starting to fill in layers 1 and 2. They're not, and maybe Salesforce buys those to fill in those 2 layers. But Atlan, there we go. And there are a number of other organizations. If you type in sort of company brain, there are a number of companies who are trying to fill in this gap. There are, even something like Box are talking about you should use Box as the back end for storing all those files. That's not quite the right answer, but I think layers 1 and 2 will be graph databases providing that information. I'm not sure Data 360 is necessarily the right database for that. It chunks. It's good at looking at unstructured data, but you want something slightly more sophisticated than that, I believe. Particularly when you get to the top layer, which is really you can't embed the rules necessarily about how your organization works. You can state how. Sorry, you can create the rules, but then you need almost to understand how to apply those rules in particular circumstances. That's what we're very good. That's what managers and teams are very good at doing. They look at it and go, okay, based on the situation, thinking about all the background, yeah, well, this is how we should operate. That's what we're trying to apply. And therefore, it's a little bit more difficult than going, it's not if X, then do Y. There's a little bit more to be inferred from that. I haven't seen anyone building anything very sophisticated there, but I'm sure those days will come. And back to Sally's earlier question, which is how do we keep the context window as small as possible? So how can we be as efficient as possible in terms of serving that information to an agent so it can behave more accurately? And I think at the moment, if you keep the agent really narrow, it's got a certain job to do, then the number of rules and the culture is actually less of an issue. But suddenly we start to go multi-run agents that are trying to do quite complicated things. Right? That idea of from a few years ago at Dreamforce, my sweater's not right. Could I send it back? Could you find me another one that's the right style in a different color and just ship it to me? Great demo, except it's not. But if you think about what's implied in doing all of that, that's really complicated. And I think we're not quite ready for that yet, until we start getting these until we really think about what the context is. Again, just my point of view, but it's I think it's back to that state. No, it's not. My screen's not shared, is it? That idea of if the agent's not working, work out what gaps in context you failed to set. It made a really bad decision. Okay, right. Well, what decisions or what rules was it given around how our culture should operate? Got to go back and start asking those questions. As I said, everything that I've been talking about and more stuff as I spend more time writing about it is there. I'm just writing an interesting angle. Obviously, I like my car analogies. Formula One. If you think about context in all its forms, whether it's data, metadata, business operations, think of that as the fuel for an agent. In the Formula One world, one of the things which they actually spend the most time measuring and managing is the fuel that goes into a car. Yeah, I mean, the cars, everyone thinks about, oh, it's actually the engine. It's not the engine, it's the fuel, which is actually what makes the difference. Yeah, everyone's got a set of rules. They can build a car to a certain, the aerodynamics, they can build the engine and so on. But what controls the output and the power is the fuel. And for the last 50 years, Formula One has spotted that you need to regulate the fuel. You really need to understand what goes into it and make sure that the different teams don't cheat. For us, that analogy means that context, we need to be clear about exactly how we govern that. So I've talked about all that context, but then you layer on top of that governance. How do I know it's correct? How do I know if it changes? If I change this bit, what else needs to change? This is a way more complicated problem than, ta-da, we found our value statement. Let's throw that in there. Oh, we found our operations manual from 1986. Let's throw that in there. Oh, let's find all the metadata from our org. Let's throw all of that in there, even though half of it's not being used. So there's a governance level associated with all of this as well. And again, we need to think about it. One of the projects we're running, we've got something called zero trust. Only things that we really trust to make it into the database, into the context database. We don't just go hoover up everything you've got and throw it in there. We're doing it the other way around, going only things that really genuinely answer the 4 questions, one of them being valid and valuable. Only those make it into the database. So it's a very different approach from the give it all the help documents. I'm sure it'll work itself out. So that's the current thinking, or our current thinking. And I think context, ontologies, all of those things have a part to play. And we've come a long way from can I configure a new object or add a new field in Salesforce. I think it's a big stretch for all of us in the ecosystem as it grows. Happy to pick up other questions, other thoughts. Stunned silence.
I had a question in the Q&A. I was wondering, when we talk about the types of context, now when we talk about agents, we have different types of them, like coding agents from Cloud Code to Agentforce vibes. Like we have Agentforce agents where we build the agents from script, or we can consider Cloud Chat or ChatGPT, Cloud Cowork, another type of agents that we may be working with to do things. So when we talk about the different types of context, is there a best practice or recommendation how to give each layer to each of those types of agents? Or like, because in my head, like, again, like if I'm talking about Cloud Code, part of it, the context is which class, which objects, what we are trying to do. But like the intent or like the culture, other stuff can be in CloudMD, can be in Skill, it can be in different ways. Like, but with Agentforce agent in the script, I don't know what's the best way to give each of those layers to the agent. So what's the best way to learn about different types of agents versus different type of context, and how to give each of them those types?
That's a great question. So I think the first point is that it's not every one of those 3 different types of agents needs all of that context. The question is how much of each area do they need? So even if you've got a coding agent, you must have some coding principles, the way your organization works. How's your dev shop work? What's not just the culture, but what's the environment that you're do you have sandboxes or don't you? What's the testing rules? So it doesn't matter whether it's a coding agent or you're using Cloud Code or it's an Agentforce agent. They need all of that. The question then is, how much of it do they need? I don't think there are any best practices yet. People are only just starting to think, only just coming to this. The whole idea that context is more than just give it some data and it'll be fine. Do you remember the quotes of, I know, bad data is junk food for AI? well, Salesforce was talking about just about data. They weren't talking about anything more than that. So we're still having to move everyone's thinking on beyond just give it the right data, it'll come up with the right answer. So are there any best practices? No. I think it's, number one, recognize you need to think about, at least ask the question, do I need to give it context at each of those 4 layers, rather than just I'll give it some data. The second is, how do I store it so I'm not constantly re-adding it? So how can I store it maybe it's in a context database with an MCP server against it, so it can go and get what it needs when it needs it. So if I think about that open brain example I gave, whenever I'm writing a new article, doing any research, I'll say, go and have a look at Aquabrain. I just say, look in AQ, because it knows what that means. Go and have a look in Aquabrain and pull up anything that's relevant. So, and then I'll probably give it a name of a theme. So if I'm working on a project, there's a project I've got called Rosetta, I'll say, look in Rosetta. So it will know, it'll go, okay, I've found there's a style sheet that it always uses. So whenever we create content, it always comes out in this colors and styles. I don't have to go and get that. It's known enough because of just the connections. And then I'll go, and it also has my voice. So it knows my voice about how I write and talk. So it brings stuff like that. So unless I ask it to do something different from that, it will pull it up. Okay. So it's the agent's actually going, okay, give me access to this context database, and I'll go and find what I need and is relevant. And I've probably got about 1,000 thoughts in there. So whenever I write something, or whenever I've had a conversation with Claude, I go save to AQ. I built a Chrome extension, so if I find a really interesting article, I go save to AQ. So I've stored those thoughts from that article or that somebody else's blog as a thought against a theme. So it's building up that picture of valuable content. And because of that ontology that Anne talked about, it's pulling it back in the context. Now, is it right all the time? No, not necessarily, but there are lots of things. And if I direct it and go, I want to write this and write it in my voice, it genuinely goes and gets it. Or go and pull 3 analogies that are really relevant. It will go and do that because it goes and finds them. So I think some of this the agents will do, but you've got to start thinking about how we're saving this. So again, little side project of mine is, how do I build the ontology around business operations? Because it's not, don't give it 3 flowcharts. That's not how the business operates. What's the ontology associated with all the different ways that we describe the business operation? And then we're going to apply the same thing for organization and culture. And I think there are no best practices yet, but at least understanding you need somehow to try and capture that. And if necessary, if you're building, say, an agent for a customer, and go, okay, well, what's your culture? Give me give me the company operations manual. Give me the let's look at the chairman's statement for the end of year. Let's take those 2 and then ask Claude to turn that back into something it can use to make sure the agent works. So use AI to reverse engineer some of this content and go write it in a way that you would find it helpful to read.
And I understand with the coding and Claude Chat, co-work, it's easy. I can see ways of doing this easy for me. And it's, again, I feel like it's not right or wrong. It's trial and error, and we are all learning together how to do it the best way. But for the agents, I feel this is where maybe, I don't know if we rely heavily on the script to put those details in the script, because it's more or less like the script between prompt instructions or deterministic if and else statements or calling an action. So it's calling data and metadata from the org, but the piece of the organization, would it be safe to assume it's more as a prompt instructions we start our agent with, or the description of our agents more or less to state those in this area?
I think, you think you need to ground it. The first thing before it starts going through the script is you need to go and understand, here's the business operation. This is actually, and here's the outcome and the intent, and here are the way we make decisions. So yes, you think about Claude has a set of instructions at the very top of it. You can hard code some instructions. So always go and get this information before you get started. I think I'm not close enough now to Agentforce about where that you put that, but that's what you need. And maybe it's the first statement in that script, which is go and get my grounding instructions. So I've got this as a backdrop.
No. Okay.
That's a great question. Let me.
To my knowledge, I don't know that it necessarily works that way, but I could see ways to force it to do that.
There you go.
There's also the context window comment is a valid issue right now too. Like depending on what model you're using and everything, there are issues with how much you're passing into Agentforce.
Yeah, but again, if we're using some form of graph database, so it's only providing the information you need, you shouldn't be blowing up the context window with the stuff. We're not. I mean, we're not trying to rebuild, I know, an ERP with this stuff. Some of these agents are not doing things that are particularly complex. Surely we're not. Are we finding is Agentforce limiting the context window that much?
It's the agent script can get very long, and it's complicated, a little bit more technical than what I'm aware of. I'm just getting this feedback from colleagues, and it can cause issues with how much it's passing to the reasoning engine and things like that.
Okay. Yeah, I guess every pass, because we've got so many layers between Agentforce and the large language model, it's adding its own prompts and its own sort of its own harness between there, back and forth.
Security and trust layer and all that stuff. Yep.
I'm not even certain that Agentforce is, I'll say, sophisticated enough to handle it in this way.
But you've got knowledge.
Like, if that makes sense.
You've got
right.
knowledge.
That's what I mean, and that's one of the ways I would see forcing it into, retrieving something and using just what's needed. Like, it doesn't have the same concept of like skills like Claude or anything like that. Like it's like, here's what you need to do this thing that I'm telling you about. And unless something's changed recently, I don't know that there's an idea of I've got a skills library that you can always use regardless of how many agents I've built in this org or any org for that matter, to always access those things. It's like each agent kind of is a standalone and every org is separate from every other org. And so like if I'm working in an org building an agent, it doesn't have access to the context I might have provided somewhere else. Unless we're telling it to fetch it out on the internet somewhere. And I have no idea if that's allowed given the whole trust layer and things like that. So I think Agentforce, I feel like, is its own animal when it comes to these agents, right? Because it lives in an org, in any given org or series of orgs if you've got a sandbox or something like that on production, which is different from building something using any of the other tools that are out there that aren't constrained by where it lives, if that makes sense.
But you could consider a script as a skill, couldn't you?
You could, but it only exists where you've built it. Unless you're going to copy it from one place and stick it somewhere else.
Yeah, true.
We've started thinking of skills semi-equivalent to sub-agents, right? In Agentforce.
Right, but it still only exists in that org.
In that agent. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. But it's like if you build a really cool sub agent that you use in a particular agent, and you're like, oh, this would be really helpful for this other client over here or this other org over here, you'd have to basically recreate it, copy paste it externally. So I mean, it's not like it can live somehow centrally and you can access that from any number of orgs.
No,
say,
okay.
Save as, which would be nice.
That's a level of sophistication we're probably not even trying to get to. But just at the moment, I think the question at the moment is, how would you, if you had one org with multiple agents, where would you save that context, that high level context? And maybe there's a context agent and you call that agent as the first thing it does.
Can it be in a custom metadata and have a first action to collect it?
Or maybe. Or it's stored, or we back to Anne's view, we store it in Data 360. So therefore, there's some way of actually getting it back that way.
Yeah, that was my thought. Like,
essentially, I've been using these principles outside Agentforce. Maybe I'll get my legs slapped for doing that, but it's.
And I think it's important because I feel like that's the real world. But I think for those of us who deal with Agentforce, it's also like we have to keep translating what we know and what we're learning in the real world back to this sort of really confined and well-defined and world where things don't operate exactly the same way. So like, I mean, that was kind of my first thought when you said like knowledge, right? I could create a PDF and stick it in my knowledge base, or, you know, I know we don't really do libraries anymore, but like 360, and say, access this. This is my list of known and unknowns, or, you know, things you can and can't do here. And you could certainly upload that into multiple different orgs to use it multiple times, but you'd still have to rebuild the agent's actions in order to get it every single time. So
Yeah,
I think we're talking about a problem that maybe you weren't necessarily talking about, but that's probably very
I
real
think
for
it's
some
very
of
valid.
us.
I often talk about principles, and then the question is, how do they land? I've made these land inside Claude with this thing called Aquabrain and with some other things, other projects that we're building. And maybe Headless 360's Salesforce's get out free jail card that says, don't worry, run it elsewhere. But no, you've got me thinking about how would we apply this to, exactly how would you apply to Agentforce? Maybe I'll do a bit more research and see if we can come back with an answer on the blog about how we'd apply some of these principles in practice. I'm conscious we're near the top of the hour. Thank you everyone for spending time with me, particularly Maria, it must be 1 in the morning for you. So I'm impressed you're still there. Thank you everybody for the questions.
She's snoozing.
I'm still here.
We'll make the recording available. I'll make the slide deck available, but the slide deck's the slide deck. More interesting is you can go straight to iangotts.com and you can find all the articles I've written about this.
Perfect. I'll make sure if I can figure out how to post that information as well for people. Ian, thank you so much for being here. Thank you everybody for all of the great conversation and questions. That was amazing. And hopefully we'll see anybody next month who's local or who wants to come to San Francisco and participate in Headless 360 at the Salesforce Tower.
All right, bye. Good luck.
All right.
Thank you
everyone.
so much. Great.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.